Welcome to Japanese Sleep Whispers, your sanctuary for peaceful nights and gentle dreams. Tonight's story is accompanied by the soothing melody Kaiman, a piece created to bring calmness and deep relaxation. Here, you will find calming bedtime stories inspired by the timeless beauty and traditions of Japan. Whether you seek peace after a long day, relief from stress, or help drifting into sleep, these stories will guide you toward tranquility. Imagine moonlit gardens, ancient temples, and whispering bamboo forests as the music of Kaiman carries you deeper into stillness. If you'd like these soothing moments to be part of your nightly ritual, consider subscribing so they're always here when you need them. Thank you for listening. May Kaiman and these gentle whispers bring you peace, tonight and always. Shadows along the temple path. Prologue. The evening path. The evening hush settled over the temple path like a soft silken veil. A faint breeze drifted through the pines and cedars, stirring their needles, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, moss, and ancient wood. The sky above deepened from pale gold into lavender, then into dusky blue, as if the night were being drawn slowly across the world. Down the gentle slope of the mountain, a stone-paved path wound its way toward an old temple hidden beyond tall gates and silent trees. The path was lined with lanterns, some made of stone, others of wood and paper, each one dimly glowing, readying itself to cast a tender light in the coming darkness. Their shapes were softened by the growing dusk, and their glow trembled like a candle's breath. A lone monk walked along the path, his steps measured, deliberate, and quiet. His robe, pale and simple, seemed to drink in the fading light rather than reflect it. In his hand, he carried a wooden staff, the grain worn smooth by years of use. Every footfall echoed softly on the stone steps, a gentle metronome marking time in this twilight world. As he walked, his eyes took in the shadows that lined the path, shadows cast by twisted roots, by lantern posts, by the overhanging branches of trees. Some shadows were long, stretching outward, others were short and deep, tucked into the corners of steps and rocks. They shifted gently as the light changed, merging, parting, dancing in silence. He paused at a turning in the path, where a stone lantern stood beside a mossy boulder. The lantern's carved panels allowed the interior glow to leak out, casting a rectangular patch of light onto the stones. In that light, the moss looked emerald and soft in the shadows. The stone's texture deepened and became almost tactile. The monk rested his staff lightly against the stone, breathing slowly. He listened to the whisper of wind through the pines, to the distant call of a night bird, echoing from the heights. To the pulse of his own breath, slow and steady. In the spaces between sounds, in the silence that lay beneath, he felt a presence not of fear, but of quiet knowing. Something older than memory, deeper than sound, watched with him. Perhaps it was simply the path itself, alive with the weight of all who had walked it before. Or perhaps it was the gathering of shadows, companioning the light. He continued onward. The path curved beneath an arch of cedar boughs, their branches reaching across, filtering the last light into shifting patterns on the stones. Somewhere ahead, a small stream murmured over rocks, hidden by ferns and brush, but its presence was felt as much as heard, a companion to the night's approach. The monk's mind was empty of urgency. He carried only his staff, his robe, and his awareness. He did not hurry, there was nowhere to arrive, only this path, only this gentle unfolding of evening into night. As the lanterns glowing along the path grew brighter in contrast to the deepening dusk, shadows lengthened. The shapes of roots, stones, and trees stretched toward the temple like silent attendants. The path itself seemed to pulse, its stones breathing, its edges softening, its contours becoming part of a living, gentle tapestry. He walked between shadows, neither avoiding them nor clinging to the light. He allowed himself to become part of the shifting pattern, light touching stone, stone yielding to shadow, shadow giving way to light. Each step, each breath, dissolved a little more of the boundary between him and the night. Eventually, the gates of the temple appeared, dark wood framed against the deep blue of sky and forest. The lanterns near the gate glowed steadfastly, their light both modest and unwavering. He paused before the gate, bowing his head toward it in reverence, not as a stranger, but as one who had long known this place. Beyond the gate lay the temple grounds, walls, halls, gardens, and calm spaces where silence dwelt. But for now, he remained on the threshold, poised between path and sacred enclosure, between dusk and darkness, between shadow and light. Here, the path's shadows gathered, blending into the stillness. The lantern's glow flickered softly, comforting and unhurried. The wind sighed through the branches overhead, and the stone seemed to hold its breath. The monk closed his eyes. He let the evening path speak to him, not in words, but in tones of shadow and light, in the pauses between presence and absence. He felt the weight of timelessness, the echo of footsteps long gone, the promise of night's embrace. He stood there in silence, in shadow, as the world around him exhaled into night. And in that hush, he prepared to walk deeper into the realm beyond twilight. Chapter 1: Lanterns in the Mist. Morning had not yet come, but the air along the temple path was no longer night. A soft, colorless mist drifted between the cedars, swallowing the outlines of stones and trees. The world was neither dark nor light, it was suspended, hushed, as if the mountain itself held its breath. The monk awoke before dawn. He had slept only a few hours, wrapped in the stillness that came after evening meditation. When he opened the shoji screens, the mist greeted him with quiet grace, flowing into the veranda like slow breath. He stepped outside. His bare feet touched the cool wood, then the smoother chill of the stone steps. The mist curled around his ankles, delicate and almost warm. Lanterns lined the path ahead, their light pale and wavering, each one a fragile sun caught within its small glass frame. The world beyond was invisible, yet near. He could hear the soft gurgle of the stream hidden in the forest. The leaves whispered faintly, and somewhere, unseen, a bird stirred its wings. The monk listened. Every sound came muffled, softened by the mist as though distance itself had become kind. He began to walk. The staff in his hand tapped lightly upon the stones, each sound dissolving before it could echo. He moved slowly, following the path that wound through the trees, past moss-covered lanterns and low shrines draped in ivy. The mist thickened as he descended. The air tasted faintly of pine and rain. Dew clung to the bamboo that bordered the path, bending its slender stalks until drops fell like silent rain upon the stones. The monk felt the coolness of each breath deep in his chest. He stopped beside an old lantern, its stone carved with petals of lotus and waves. Its inner flame flickered softly, the light shifting as though breathing. He brushed a bit of moss from its side and whispered a few words, not prayer, but gratitude. In that moment, the mist seemed to listen. He looked down the path. The lanterns glowed faintly in a gentle curve, each light a small island in the sea of fog. Between them, shadows moved not dark, but fluid and tender, like water stirred by the moon. He thought of all the pilgrims who had walked this same path before him, some seeking peace, others meaning, some simply passing through. Their footsteps had long vanished, yet something of them remained. Their intentions, their breaths, their quiet hopes all woven into the mist that lingered here. The monk smiled faintly. The past, he realized, was not gone, it was simply folded into the air. He walked on. The path narrowed between tall stones, their surfaces slick with dew. A spider's web hung between two branches, heavy with droplets that caught the lantern light like scattered pearls. The monk stopped to watch how they shimmered and then dimmed again as the fog shifted. Each drop reflected the world, the lantern, the path, the monk himself, but when he blinked, the image was gone, replaced by another. He understood the reflection was not a capture, but a letting go. He bowed his head slightly and continued. A bend in the path led him to a small clearing where the mist was thinner. Here, the trees opened to reveal a pond, still and gray, its surface unbroken except for a single ripple from a falling leaf. The lantern nearest to the water stood crooked, its base half swallowed by earth and time. The monk knelt before it, relit the dimming flame within, and watched as its glow returned. The light shimmered across the pond's surface, scattering into 1,000 soft reflections that trembled and vanished. The mist, the water, the flame all moved in harmony. Each part was changing, yet none were lost. He lingered there, breathing slowly. The silence was deep, but not empty. It was a silence that held warmth, a silence that listened back. As he rose, a movement caught his eye. Across the pond, through the thinning veil of mist, he thought he saw a figure, pale, still, standing upon the far path. Its form was gentle, without edge or weight, and for a heartbeat, it seemed to bow. The monk blinked, and the shape was gone. Only the mist remained, curling gently over the water. He felt no fear, only a quiet recognition, as though he had glimpsed an echo perhaps of himself, perhaps of another time. He stood for a while longer, then turned back toward the path. The mist began to lift as dawn approached. The faintest color touched the eastern sky, a whisper of blue behind the gray. The lanterns, still burning, began to dim in this new light, their glow merging with the growing day. As he walked back toward the temple, the shadows along the path softened and faded. The mist, too, began to drift upward, leaving the stones wet and gleaming. The monk paused once more before the gate, where the first sunlight touched the wooden frame. He bowed, then turned his gaze toward the mountains beyond, where the world was waking. Behind him, the lanterns flickered once more, their flames trembling like the last breath of night. He smiled and whispered to the morning air, even the shadows must rest. And with that, he stepped inside. Chapter 2: Whisper of Stone and Moss. The morning light came slowly to the temple path. It did not burst forth like dawn in the city, it drifted, gentle and unhurried. Slipping between the trunks of ancient cedars, brushing the moss, touching the stones. The mist had thinned to a silver haze, and the air was cool and tender. The monk moved quietly through the garden beyond the temple gate. The earth was damp beneath his feet, still soft from the night's dew. Everywhere he looked, the world was green, not the bright green of spring, but the deep, breathing green of age. Moss covered every surface, the steps, the lanterns, even the roots of the trees. It grew thick and soft, a living memory of rain and time. He knelt beside a stone basin where rainwater had gathered. The surface reflected the sky, a faint blue traced with drifting clouds. As he dipped his hand into the water, ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection into soft, trembling circles. The motion was slow, mesmerizing, like a breath drawn in and released. The monk watched until the water stilled again. In the quiet, he could hear the faint murmur of the forest beyond the sound of unseen insects. The sigh of wind through needles, the drop of water from leaf to leaf. The world spoke, not in words, but in rhythm. He took up a small bamboo broom and began to sweep the path. Each stroke was deliberate, smooth, almost ritualistic. The sound of bristles against stone joined the morning's silence, blending with the rustle of trees. He did not sweep to erase the fallen leaves, he swept to know them, to feel their lightness, their color, their place among the stones. The moss seemed to hum beneath his movements, as if acknowledging the care. Its scent rose faintly, rich and earthy, filling the air with calm. After a time, he stopped beside an old stone statue. It stood half hidden behind a curtain of ivy, its features worn by centuries of rain. The faint trace of a smile remained upon its lips, serene and knowing. The monk bowed. He placed a single camellia bloom at its feet, the petals still wet from morning dew. As he straightened, he noticed how the light had changed. The sun, still low, struck through the leaves in threads of gold, illuminating tiny motes of dust and pollen that danced in the air. The temple stones gleamed faintly. Shadows shifted, lengthened, and softened once more. He stood in that stillness, surrounded by quiet motion. The moss whispered beneath him, the stones breathed beneath his steps, and the air moved like water around his body. He felt the deep pulse of the mountain, the slow rhythm that underlies all things living and still. For a moment, the world felt endless, as if each stone were a seed of time, each breath a continuation of eternity. He sat upon the steps, laying the broom beside him. The light played across his hands, revealing faint scars and lines, traces of years of service and silence. He ran his fingertips along the stone surface beside him. It was warm now, holding the memory of the sun. The moss clung gently to his robe. It was soft, like a whisper against skin. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, The world did not disappear, it deepened. He could hear everything: the brush of leaves, the hum of bees in the far garden, the faint creak of temple wood as it expanded in the sunlight. Each sound was part of one great, slow breathing. He felt no need to move. Stillness, he realized, was not the absence of life, it was its most honest form. When he opened his eyes, a small sparrow had landed on the stone nearby. It tilted its head toward him, chirped softly, and then hopped closer, pecking at a grain of rice left from a morning offering. The monk smiled. "You, too, are part of this prayer," he whispered. The bird fluttered its wings and flew into the air, scattering a few drops of dew from the moss as it went. The droplets caught the sunlight and gleamed like tiny lanterns. The monk rose slowly and turned toward the inner courtyard. There, an old well stood beside a maple tree. Its wooden lid was worn smooth by countless hands, its rope darkened by time. He drew up a bucket of water, clear and cold, and poured it gently over the stone steps. The water flowed downward in thin streams, glistening as it passed over the moss, tracing paths of light. Everywhere the water touched, the colors deepened, the greens became richer, the grays of the stone darker, more alive. The air filled with the scent of rain, though no clouds were in the sky. The monk dipped his hands into the flow and let it run over his palms. He thought of how water, too, listens to stone, to moss, to the air it passes through. And how, in return, everything remembers the water. He whispered a verse under his breath, one taught long ago by his master. Where moss clings, time rests. Where water flows, thought dissolves. Where stone endures, silence speaks. The words disappeared into the air, absorbed by the garden. The sound of them lingered only in feeling, like the fading ring of a bell. He placed the bucket aside and looked once more upon the path he had swept. The stones shone softly, the moss shimmered faintly, the shadows, gentle and gray, leaned close as though listening. The monk bowed to them, to the stone, the moss, the quiet breath of the mountain, and turned back toward the temple hall. Behind him, the garden remained still. The water slowed to a trickle. The sunlight shifted, delicate and warm. And in that stillness, the moss and stone whispered to one another in voices too soft for words, a conversation of centuries, a lullaby of the earth itself. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Departed. Evening had returned to the mountain. The last threads of daylight drifted through the trees, pale and gold, before dissolving into the cool gray of dusk. The temple bell had already sounded, its tone rolling through the valleys like a wave that took a long time to fade. The monk sat upon the veranda, watching the shadows lengthen across the courtyard. The lanterns had not yet been lit. The world rested in that in-between hour when colors fade, and silence begins to breathe. He rose, took his staff, and walked once more toward the path beyond the temple gate. The stones were cool underfoot, still damp from the water he had poured in the morning. Moss glowed faintly in the fading light, soft as dusk itself. As he descended, he noticed how the shadows gathered. They were not the sharp-edged darknesses of daylight, they were soft, fluid, as though woven from the same fabric as the mist. They clung to the roots, curled beneath the lanterns, and moved gently when the breeze passed. Each one seemed to carry its own breath. The monk walked slowly, feeling the world grow quieter around him. The forest had stilled, only the faint sound of the stream remained, whispering from somewhere unseen. Above, a single star flickered in the widening sky. When he reached the bend where the path curved along the hillside, he paused. Here, the lanterns were older, their stone bases cracked, their carvings softened by centuries of rain. Some no longer held light, their hollows were filled with leaves. He placed his hand upon one of them, feeling the roughness of the stone, the cool dampness of time. The scent of old moss rose, gentle and familiar. And then very softly he heard a voice. It was not a sound exactly, but a stirring, a tone, like the low hum of wind through a hollow tree. It did not come from without, but from within the air itself. The monk closed his eyes. The sound deepened, then took form not as words, but as presence. He felt it around him, behind him, within him, the quiet gathering of many lives. Footsteps upon the same stones, hands upon the same railings, breaths taken beneath the same sky. He opened his eyes. The mist had returned, rising once more from the valley below. It curled around the path, weaving between the lanterns, catching the light of the first few stars. And within that mist, faint shapes began to appear. They were not solid, only impressions, the suggestion of robes, the glimmer of movement, the turn of a head that left no trace. They walked slowly, like pilgrims on an endless journey, their shadows slipping soundlessly across the stones. The monk watched them without fear. Each one passed as gently as the mist itself, their forms bending, blending, dissolving into air. He realized he was not seeing ghosts, but memories, the lingering breath of all who had ever walked this path. Each figure was a ripple of time, rising briefly, then fading back into silence. He bowed his head. "May you find rest," he whispered. The shadows seemed to pause. The air grew warmer, and for an instant, he felt surrounded not by absence, but by quiet gratitude, like the warmth that remains in the air after incense burns away. One figure lingered near the bend in the path. Its outline shimmered faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the trees. The monk could not see its face, but he felt something familiar, a calmness that mirrored his own. He took a step forward. The mist parted, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw the shape of his teacher, the old master who had passed many seasons ago. The figure stood still, hands folded, head slightly bowed. No words passed between them. None were needed. In the silence, understanding flowed like water. There was no distance, no boundary, only the quiet knowing that all things, living or gone, move within the same current of light and shadow. Then the mist thickened once more, and the figure dissolved into it, leaving only the faint scent of sandalwood in the air. The monk stood there for a long time. The moon rose higher, silver and whole, casting long beams of light through the cedars. The path glimmered, and the mist began to drift away, leaving behind the soft gleam of wet stone. He resumed walking, his staff tapping gently against the ground. The forest was silent again, but he knew now that silence was not empty, it was full of echoes, of memory, of unseen kindness. At the next lantern, he stopped and lit a small candle within its hollow. The flame flickered, steady and low, casting a soft glow on the surrounding moss. "For those who came before," he whispered. The light trembled once, as if answering. He continued down the path until the forest opened to the moonlit valley. The world below was vast, veiled in silver mist. The roofs of Kyoto shimmered faintly in the distance. The monk breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill his chest. Every life, he thought, every breath, every moment of joy or sorrow, each leaves a trace, a shadow that remains not to haunt, but to remind. He turned back toward the temple. The lantern flames along the path glowed brighter now, their light mingling with the moon's. As he walked, his own shadow stretched beside him, long, quiet, and patient. It moved when he moved, paused when he paused, as though walking not behind him, but with him. He smiled softly. In this world of light and shadow, nothing was truly gone. Everything lived on, whispering through the stones and moss, through the mist that rose and fell, through the silence that carried every name ever spoken. The monk reached the gate once more, bowed to the night, and stepped inside. Behind him, the path shimmered faintly in the moonlight, the shadows of the departed resting peacefully along its stones. And as the wind moved through the cedars, it carried a single whisper through the night. We are not gone. We are only quiet. Chapter 4 Moonlit Reflections. The night was still. So still that even the breath of the wind seemed hesitant to disturb the silence. The moon had risen high above the mountain ridge, full and radiant, its light spilling gently across the temple roofs and down into the garden below. The monk sat beside the koi pond, the same one he had tended since his youth. The surface was smooth as glass, reflecting the moon so clearly that it seemed as though a second sky rested within the water. A faint mist hovered above the pond, curling softly like incense smoke. The carp beneath moved slowly, their shadows drifting like clouds across the moon's reflection. Each movement created a ripple, bending the moonlight into shimmering circles that spread, widened, and faded. The monk watched, his breathing slow and steady. He could feel the pulse of the world aligning with his own heartbeat, quiet, patient, eternal. He dipped his hand into the pond. The water was cool and smooth, like silk. It parted gently around his fingers, and the reflection of the moon wavered, breaking into fragments of light. For a moment, he imagined the moon smiling softly, knowingly, as if amused by its own dance upon the ripples. He drew his hand back and watched as the circles stilled again. The reflection returned, perfect and whole. So, too, he thought, does the heart return to stillness after being touched by thought. Each worry, each memory, each longing is only a ripple, the true surface remains unbroken beneath. He sat a while longer, letting this truth settle within him. Behind him, the old temple bell hung in the dark, its shape half hidden by vines. Though it did not ring, he could almost hear it. The memory of its tone still echoed in his chest, low and resonant, like the earth itself breathing. The night deepened. Somewhere beyond the garden, a nightingale sang a single note, soft and pure. It lingered in the air, then faded into silence. The sound left behind a gentle emptiness, a space that felt both vast and tender. The monk looked upward. The sky was wide and filled with light, each star a grain of memory, each cloud a drifting thought. The moon seemed larger now, haloed by a faint ring. Its reflection in the pond was steady once more, its edges sharp and silver. He leaned closer, gazing into the water. For an instant, he thought he saw not his own reflection, but another's, the faint image of his master once again, smiling faintly beneath the moon. Then, as a breeze passed, the image vanished, replaced by the rippling face of the water. The monk smiled softly. Perhaps the moon, too, remembers. He took up a small ladle and poured a trickle of pond water over a nearby stone lantern. The water glimmered as it ran down, gathering into small droplets that clung to the edges before falling into the grass. The lantern's carvings, flowers, vines, and waves caught the moonlight and shone as if alive. He whispered a prayer, one without words, a prayer for light to touch even the quietest corners, for shadow to find its peace within the glow. The night accepted his prayer without sound. The trees swayed slightly, the bamboo leaves whispered like distant rain. As he sat there, he became aware of how the light and shadow were not separate at all. The moon's reflection existed only because of the darkness around it. The shadows on the path existed only because of the light above. Everything, he thought, is held together by the gentle meeting of both. The water mirrored this truth, the bright moon above, the deep dark beneath. And in between them, the soft ripples of movement, like breath, like time. He stayed by the pond until the air began to cool. Dew gathered on the moss, shimmering faintly. The carp sank deeper, their movements slower, until they vanished into the dark water. The monk stood, stretching his back. His robe caught the moonlight, and for a moment, he appeared as much a part of the landscape as the stones and the trees, a moving shadow among stillness. He walked back toward the temple, his steps slow and deliberate. The gravel path crunched softly beneath his feet, the sound delicate as falling rain. Each step brought a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completion, though he could not have said what had been completed. At the threshold of the hall, he paused. He turned once more toward the pond. The moon reflected there, whole and clear, unbroken now by movement or wind. It was as if it had always been waiting for him to look back. He bowed. The light trembled faintly upon the water, and for a moment, the entire garden seemed to breathe. Then, slowly, the monk stepped inside the temple. The sliding door closed with a soft, wooden sigh. Outside, the night continued calm, luminous, eternal. And in the pond beyond, the moon watched over the sleeping world, its reflection undisturbed, its light reaching even the deepest corners of shadow. Chapter 5: The Path of Returning Light. Before dawn, the mountain was wrapped in silence. The air was cool and still, touched by the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The moon had begun its descent toward the horizon, pale and weary, its light thinning across the temple roofs like the last whisper of a dream. The monk awoke before the first bird's song. He did not rise at once. For a moment, he simply breathed, listening to the stillness that lingered between night and day. His breath rose in slow clouds that dissolved into the dim air. When he finally stood, his robe brushed softly against the floor. He opened the wooden door and stepped into the outer corridor. The boards creaked faintly beneath his feet, a sound that felt older than memory itself. The courtyard lay before him, bathed in silver gray. Mist drifted along the ground, low and gentle, weaving around the stepping stones and the moss. In the faint light, the garden looked neither real nor imagined, but something in between, a space where time itself seemed to rest. He walked toward the stone path that led to the gate. Each step was measured, each breath aligned with the world's slow turning. The lanterns from the night before had burned low. Their flames were small but steady, little hearts of light holding on until morning. He paused by one of them and shielded the flame with his hand. "Thank you," he whispered, and gently blew it out. A thin line of smoke rose, curling into the air before vanishing. The scent of spent wax and soot lingered briefly, then faded into the mist. The monk continued down the path. Above the trees, the first color of dawn appeared, a soft blue that deepened with each passing breath. The shadows that had filled the forest began to retreat, not in fear, but in peace, returning to the places they belonged. He reached the bend where, the night before, the shapes of the departed had appeared. Now, it was empty, only the sound of the stream, and the distant cry of a crow welcoming the coming day. Yet he could feel them still. Not as ghosts, not as memories, but as presence woven into the moss, resting in the stones, breathing within the mist. He bowed once more, hands pressed together. "Your journey is done," he said softly. "And mine continues." The forest seemed to sigh, as if in answer. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the smell of water and pine and the sweet trace of camellia from the offering he had left days before. He smiled. The path led him upward, toward the ridge where the temple roof caught the first gold of morning. As he climbed, the light grew warmer, spreading across the trees in delicate streaks. The mist began to lift, revealing the garden below, a tapestry of green and gray and silver dew. At the top of the steps, he stopped. From here, he could see Kyoto awakening. The city lay in a soft haze, rooftops glimmering faintly as the sun's edge touched them. Smoke rose from unseen kitchens, a bell echoed faintly from another temple far below. The monk closed his eyes. He felt the warmth of the light touch his face, and for a moment, he was neither young nor old, neither master nor novice, only breath, only being. He understood now that the path he walked was not only of stone and moss, it was also of time, of heart, of light returning endlessly upon itself. Every dawn was not the beginning, but the gentle continuation of the same eternal moment. He opened his eyes again. The sun had risen above the hills, and the last traces of moonlight faded from the pond below. Yet he knew that even when unseen, the moon remained hidden behind the day, waiting to return. He whispered a final prayer, not for himself, not even for the world, but for the quiet between them. "May all things rest," he said. "May all hearts find their stillness." A single bird took flight from the maple tree beside him, its wings flashing briefly in the morning light. The sound of its passage was small but infinite, a single breath echoing across the sky. The monk stood for a long moment, watching until the bird became a point of light against the horizon. Then he turned and began walking back toward the temple. His shadow stretched long before him now, not the deep gray of night, but soft and golden, touched by the rising sun. It moved easily, gently, almost playfully, as though the shadow itself had learned to smile. When he reached the gate, he paused once more and looked back down the path. The stones glimmered with dew. The moss shone faintly. And through it all, the light moved, returning, renewing, remembering. He bowed deeply. The sound of the wind through the bamboo answered him like a whispering hymn. Then, quietly, he stepped inside. Behind him, the garden stirred to life, a ripple upon the pond, a beam of sunlight through the cedars, a breath of air carrying the scent of pine and rain. The shadows had gone to rest, the light had returned, and the mountain, for a time, was perfectly still. The sparrows whisper in the grove. Prologue: the quiet grove. At the edge of Kyoto, where the city's hum softened into the whisper of wind and pine, there was a temple hidden deep within a grove. The path leading to it was narrow, paved with stones worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps. Moss grew between them, thick, green, and soft, like the memory of rain. In this temple lived a young monk named Ren. He was not yet a master of prayer or meditation. His days were filled with silence and the small, deliberate acts of care, sweeping fallen leaves, tending the garden, lighting incense before dawn. This morning, he woke before the first bell. The air was cool, touched by the scent of cedar and damp earth. A faint mist clung to the trees, drifting like breath between the trunks. Beyond the sliding paper doors, the world was still asleep. Even the birds had not yet begun to sing. Ren rose quietly, folding his blanket with slow, practiced hands. He dressed in his simple robe and stepped out into the corridor. The wood was cold beneath his bare feet, but it welcomed him like an old friend. The temple was silent, yet alive. The wind moved softly through the pines, a drop of water fell from the eaves, landing with a soft sound on the stone below. He really listened to these small, perfect notes, as though the world itself was reciting a sutra only he could hear. He took the broom resting by the wall and began to sweep the courtyard. Each motion was slow, circular, rhythmic. The sound of the bristles brushing the stone merged with the rustling of bamboo leaves. Time lost its meaning. There was only motion, breath, and the faint scent of incense drifting from the hall. When the sweeping was done, Ren straightened his back and looked toward the grove beyond the gate. The mist there glowed faintly, silver and soft. It was then he heard it, the whisper. A small, delicate sound, lighter than wind, softer than falling rain. It came from somewhere deep within the trees. He paused, tilting his head. The sound came again, clearer this time. A chirp, followed by another. A sparrow. Ren smiled. He had often seen the small brown bird near the temple pond, darting between the reeds or drinking from the stone basin. But now, in the early stillness, the sound of its voice felt different, closer, more alive, as if it carried a message meant only for him. He set down his broom and walked slowly toward the gate. The world outside the temple walls was wrapped in a hush. The path descended gently into the grove, where old cedars stood tall, their roots entwined like sleeping dragons. The mist curled around them, thick enough to soften the outlines of the trees, yet thin enough to let the morning light shimmer through. Ren stepped onto the path. The moss was damp beneath his feet, cool and fragrant. Each step released a faint scent of earth, of time, of quiet decay that fed new life. The sparrow's voice echoed again, leading him deeper. He followed it without hurry, guided only by sound. In the heart of the grove stood a small stone pagoda, half covered in ivy and age. A thin stream trickled beside it, the water clear as glass. The sparrow perched on the pagoda's edge, feathers puffed against the chill. When Ren approached, it did not fly away. Instead, it tilted its head, watching him with bright, black eyes. Ren stopped a few steps away and bowed slightly. "Good morning, little one," he said softly. His voice was barely more than a breath. The bird chirped once in reply, a simple note, but it seemed to linger in the air long after. He sat upon a nearby stone and closed his eyes. The world moved around him, the wind through the leaves, the water over the stones, the faint rustle of feathers. He felt his heartbeat slow. Each breath came deeper, calmer. In that moment, it seemed to him that the grove itself was breathing with him, through him. The air filled his lungs, and when he exhaled, the mist seemed to pulse outward, as if returning the breath in kind. He opened his eyes again. The sparrow had hopped closer, its tiny claws gripping the moss. It let out another sound, not a song, but a whisper, so faint he almost thought it was the voice of the wind. It was then he remembered something his teacher once said. The smallest sound, when heard with an open heart, carries the truth of the whole world. Wren watched the sparrow, and for the first time, he understood what his teacher had meant. The bird was not merely singing. It was reminding the whole forest that everything was connected by the same quiet pulse. The wind stirred again, carrying a few fallen leaves across the path. They fluttered like fragments of dreams before coming to rest upon the stream. The water took them gently, carrying them away. Wren whispered a simple prayer, though he did not know to whom it was addressed, to all that breathes, to all that rests. The sparrow fluttered its wings once, then lifted into the air. Its flight was light, almost soundless, yet it left behind a soft tremor in the air like the fading tone of a temple bell. Wren watched until it vanished among the branches. Then he bowed once more to the grove. As he turned to walk back to the temple, the mist began to lift. The first color of dawn touched the treetops, a delicate gold, spreading slowly through the gray. The sound of other birds joined in, hesitant at first, then fuller, brighter, like small lamps being lit one by one. By the time he reached the courtyard again, the temple was bathed in morning light. He placed the broom back by the wall, wiped his hands on his robe, and looked once more toward the grove. The sparrow's whisper still echoed somewhere deep within the forest, soft, eternal, like the memory of a dream that refuses to fade. Wren smiled and closed his eyes. He breathed deeply, and the breath carried both silence and sound. The day had begun, but within his heart, the quiet grove remained. Untouched, a place where time moved like water, and even the smallest voice could be heard by the whole of heaven. Chapter 1. Beneath the Old Cedar. Morning came slowly to the temple grove. Light slipped through the tall cedar trees, painting the ground in soft patterns of gold and green. Dew clung to every blade of grass, glimmering faintly like tiny lanterns left behind by the night. Wren stood at the edge of the courtyard, a broom once again in his hands. The world was still half asleep, the air cool, the stones damp beneath his feet. Yet inside him, something gentle had begun to stir. The sparrow's whisper from the dawn still echoed in his thoughts. A single note, small and fragile, yet somehow infinite. It was as if that sound had awakened not only the forest, but something quiet and waiting inside his own heart. He finished sweeping the courtyard, then placed the broom aside. His teacher had once told him, "When your hands are busy, let your heart rest. When your hands are still, let your heart listen." And so, with the temple chores done, Ren walked toward the grove again. The forest opened before him like a great, living temple, its pillars made of cedar, its ceiling woven from branches and sky. A narrow path led deeper, carpeted with fallen needles that muffled his steps. He followed it in silence. The air grew cooler, filled with the smell of resin and earth. Birdsong began to rise, first one, then another, until the grove itself seemed to hum with gentle life. At the center of the grove stood the great cedar. Its trunk was vast, scarred by age, its roots coiled around the stones like the arms of an ancient guardian. The bark was dark and rough, yet when Ren placed his hand upon it, it felt warm, alive with quiet strength. He bowed deeply before the tree, as one might bow before a teacher. Then he sat upon the moss at its base, legs crossed, spine straight, hands resting lightly in his lap. He closed his eyes. The forest breathed around him. He could hear the faint movement of wind weaving through the leaves, the whisper of a bird taking flight, the soft creak of branches as the world shifted almost imperceptibly. He began to follow his breath in and out, like the tide of a distant sea. With each breath, the boundaries between his body and the forest softened. The smell of cedar filled him. The heartbeat of the earth began to echo his own. Time dissolved, melting into a slow rhythm of being. Somewhere above, a small sparrow landed upon one of the branches. It chirped once softly, like a bell ringing far away. Ren smiled without opening his eyes. The sound was simple, yet it carried the same peace as a sutra. He remembered the first time he had come to this grove, many seasons ago. He had been restless then, filled with questions he could not name about life, about silence, about the purpose of walking this narrow path. The elder monk who had guided him here had said only sit beneath the old cedar. The tree will teach you what words cannot. Now, years later, he understood. The cedar spoke, not through sound, but through presence. Its stillness was a teaching, its patience a kind of truth. A breeze moved through the grove, carrying the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. The light shifted, soft gold fading into muted silver as a thin cloud passed before the sun. Ren opened his eyes slightly. The forest shimmered. Every leaf seemed suspended in a delicate balance between motion and stillness, between life and decay. He watched a droplet fall from a fern, landing silently upon the moss. The circle it left behind widened, then vanished, absorbed back into the earth. Everything returned to stillness. Wren's breathing deepened. The sound of his exhale blended with the wind's sigh. He could feel his thoughts growing lighter, like mist dissolving into morning air. After a while, he noticed something, a soft movement near the roots of the cedar. A small sparrow was hopping through the fallen leaves, pecking gently at the ground. He watched it without thought, simply observing the quiet rhythm of its search, the way it paused, listened, moved again. Every motion seemed effortless, guided by some natural wisdom beyond words. The bird fluttered up to a low branch, tilting its head toward him. For a brief moment, their eyes met, human and sparrow, stillness and motion. And in that instant, Wren felt a connection deeper than understanding. He bowed slightly, wordless. The sparrow gave a faint chirp, then flew higher into the canopy, where sunlight filtered through the branches like threads of gold. He remained there for a long time, breathing in the forest's silence. The world beyond the noise of the city, the passage of hours seemed to fade away entirely. There was only this, the cedar, the breath, and the endless hush between the two. When at last he rose to his feet, the sun had climbed higher. Shafts of light pierced through the leaves, scattering across the moss like fragments of glass. He placed a hand upon the cedar's trunk once more. It was solid, unchanging, and yet within its stillness, he could feel the slow pulse of life, the same quiet rhythm that filled his own chest. He whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." The forest answered in its own way, a soft wind, a rustle of leaves, the faint sound of wings. Wren turned and began walking back toward the temple. Each step was lighter now, his mind clear, his heart unburdened. The world around him felt softer, as if wrapped in a silken veil of calm. By the time he reached the temple gate, the sparrow's voice echoed once more from somewhere in the distance. It was not calling him this time. It was simply singing for the grove, for the morning, for all that was and would ever be. Wren smiled. He bowed to the sound, to the trees, to the silence that embraced them all. Then he stepped inside the temple hall, where the scent of incense awaited him, and began his morning. Chant, each syllable a ripple upon the surface of stillness. Outside, beneath the old cedar, the forest continued to breathe quietly, endlessly, as if the very air remembered the rhythm of his meditation. Chapter 2: The River That Remembers. The forest whispered with a sound both old and gentle. Morning had deepened into late day, and the light now fell in long ribbons through the trees. Wren followed the familiar path, his sandals brushing the soft carpet of moss. A faint melody reached his ears, the murmur of water, winding unseen through the grove. It was the sound of the river. He had heard it countless times, yet each time it seemed different, sometimes clear and bright like laughter, sometimes slow and deep, as if carrying the voice of the past. The elders at the temple often said the river held memories. Every drop of water that touched its stones carried with it the echo of rain that had fallen centuries ago. Ren liked that thought. He imagined that the river remembered everything, the prayers spoken by monks long gone, the footsteps of travelers who once paused to drink, the songs of birds whose names had been forgotten. As he neared the water, the air grew cooler. The path opened to reveal a small clearing where sunlight danced upon the stream's surface. It moved with quiet grace, winding between smooth stones, glinting like liquid glass. Ren knelt by the bank. He dipped his fingers into the flow. It was cold, alive. The chill traveled up his arm, into his chest, until he could feel his heart beating in rhythm with the current. For a long while, he said nothing. He simply watched the movement of the water, the way it slipped around each rock without resistance. It never fought. It never stopped. It simply continued on its way, changing shape with every turn, yet remaining always itself. He thought of his own life. Since entering the temple, his days had flowed much like the river, repeating, quiet, unhurried. There had been moments of restlessness, when he wondered what lay beyond the mountains, beyond the stillness. But whenever he came here, to this stream, those questions dissolved like ripples in the water. He picked up a small stone from the bank and turned it in his hand. It was smooth and pale, its surface shaped by years of water's gentle touch. He wondered how long it had lain here, how many rains, how many winters had passed over it. He placed it back where it had been, exactly as he found it. The sparrow's voice returned then, soft and distant, from somewhere high in the trees. It sang just once, a single note that blended perfectly with the sound of the stream. Ren smiled. "You remember me," he whispered. The river, too, seemed to respond. Its current shifted, forming small spirals that caught the light. For a moment, it looked as if the water itself was breathing. He leaned closer, his reflection trembling upon the surface. It looked younger there, almost childlike, his eyes wide, filled with wonder. But behind that reflection, he saw another shape, the ghostly outline of the temple roof, the forest bending above it like a great, protective hand. A memory surfaced, his first night at the temple. He had been afraid, then the silence too deep, the darkness too vast. But his teacher had led him outside, to this very river, and said, "Listen, Ren. The water does not fear the night. Even in darkness, it continues to flow. He had listened, and the fear had eased. Now, years later, the same sound surrounded him again, ancient, steady, kind. He closed his eyes and let the sound carry him. The rhythm of the river merged with his breath. Time loosened its hold. The past and present wove together like threads of the same cloth. In that stillness, images drifted through his mind like leaves upon the water, his mother's smile. Faint and distant, the temple bell ringing through fog, a sparrow perched upon the cedar's branch. Each image appeared, shimmered, and faded, leaving behind only calm. He opened his eyes again. A single leaf floated down from a tree above and landed upon the surface of the river. It spun slowly, carried forward by the current. Ren watched it go until it disappeared around a bend. Everything flows, he thought. The river, the breath, the heart. Even silence moves, in its own quiet way. He stood and stretched. His legs ached slightly from kneeling, but the ache felt alive, real, grounding. He turned to leave, but before stepping away, he spoke softly to the water. "May your journey be peaceful." A breeze passed through the grove, and the surface of the stream shimmered in reply. Ren smiled and began walking back toward the temple. As he went, the sound of the river followed him, soft at first, then fading into the hum of cicadas and rustling leaves. The forest breathed. And somewhere far off, perhaps in the distance or perhaps within his own heart, the sparrow sang again, a sound as small as a sigh, as endless as time itself. Chapter 3: The Sparrow Returns. The afternoon light had softened into gold by the time Ren returned from the river. The air was warm, yet touched by the faint coolness that hinted at evening. He could hear the hum of cicadas, steady, endless, like a veil of sound draped over the forest. He walked slowly along the path, his robe brushing the tall grasses that swayed at the forest's edge. Above him, the leaves glimmered in the sinking sun, and between them, a few white clouds drifted lazily across the pale blue sky. Ren paused. Something in the air felt familiar, an almost imperceptible stillness, like the pause before a single note of music. And then he heard it. A small chirp, light and clear. It came from somewhere near the old cedar. He turned toward the grove, heart quietly stirring. The sound came again, closer this time, soft but certain. Ren smiled and began walking. His steps were soundless on the moss, his breath slow and steady. As he approached the great cedar, the shadows lengthened, painting the forest floor in shades of silver and green. The sparrow was waiting. It perched on a low branch, feathers ruffled in the gentle wind. Its head tilted slightly, as if in recognition. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Wren bowed his head. "It's been a while," he whispered. His voice was soft, barely more than a breath. The sparrow chirped once, the sound crisp and delicate. It was not quite a song, nor merely a call, it was something in between, like a word that had forgotten its meaning but not its feeling. Wren sat beneath the tree, folding his legs and resting his hands in his lap. The sparrow hopped closer, watching him with bright eyes that caught the last of the day's light. He felt no need to speak further. The silence between them was enough. The forest around them seemed to deepen in color. The golden hue of sunset began to shift toward amber, then to blue. Somewhere far away, a stream murmured. The sound mingled with the faint rustling of bamboo leaves and the first distant calls of evening birds. Wren closed his eyes. He breathed in the scent of cedar, damp earth, and fading sunlight. He could hear the sparrow move its small claws scraping lightly against the bark, the flutter of wings as it shifted its place. In his mind, he saw the bird not as a creature apart, but as part of the rhythm of everything. The breath of the wind, the turning of leaves, the heartbeat within his chest, all of it moved together, one motion, one sound. He thought of the words his teacher once spoke: "Listen not to what is said, but to what is silent between the words." And in that silence, Wren began to hear. He heard the quiet passage of time, the day folding into night. He heard the distant bell of the temple, carried faintly through the trees. He heard his own breath blending with the sigh of the forest. And then, beneath it all, he heard the sparrow's whisper. It was not a song this time, but a rhythm soft, repeating, like a mantra hidden in the sound of wings. He could not tell if it came from outside or from within. The air seemed to shimmer around him. For an instant, the boundaries between sound and silence vanished. He opened his eyes. The sparrow was in flight. It rose into the dimming sky, its small body outlined against the light that lingered between the trees. As it circled above him, the golden glow caught its wings, and for a moment, it looked like a spark, something ancient and eternal, flickering at the edge of twilight. Wren watched until the bird vanished beyond the canopy. But even after it was gone, the air felt alive with its presence. He placed his palms together and bowed toward the sky. "Thank you," he murmured. The forest answered with a breath of wind that stirred the leaves, gentle and slow. It brushed against his face like a blessing. He sat there until the light faded entirely. The world turned blue, then silver. Fireflies began to appear, small lamps drifting between the roots and stones. Wren stayed still, listening. The river murmured in the distance. The night insects began their song. The temple bell rang once, a long, low tone that lingered like mist. He rose finally and began the walk back through the grove. His steps were guided by memory rather than sight. The darkness did not frighten him, it felt familiar, like a vast, soft robe wrapping gently around the world. When he reached the courtyard, he paused to look back. The forest was quiet now, its shapes fading into the night. But somewhere within that darkness, he imagined the sparrow resting upon a branch, feathers tucked, heart beating in rhythm with the earth. Wren smiled faintly. He whispered, "May your dreams be peaceful." Then he entered the temple, sliding the wooden door closed behind him. Inside, the air was warm and scented with cedar smoke. A single candle flickered in the corner, its flame bending and rising like a living breath. Wren sat before it, cross-legged, and let his thoughts drift as freely as the river's current. Outside, the forest whispered. And from somewhere unseen, a tiny sound, a single chirp echoed through the night. Chapter 4 Night over the Grove. Night came gently to the grove. It did not fall, as some nights do, but drifted soft and slow like a veil of silk descending from the sky. The last traces of sunlight faded beyond the western hills, and a pale moon rose above the cedar tops. It was round and calm, its light silvering the moss and stones, washing the world in a quiet glow. Wren stepped out of the temple hall, a small lantern in his hand. The air was cool now, touched with the faint scent of incense that lingered from the evening prayers. Crickets sang in a steady rhythm, their voices blending with the low hum of the wind. He crossed the courtyard, his footsteps barely disturbing the silence. The forest ahead shimmered in moonlight, the trunks of the cedars tall and luminous, their shadows stretching long across the ground. Wren extinguished the lantern. He did not need its light. The moon was bright enough, and its glow felt softer, kinder, as if it carried the memory of 1,000 prayers. He followed the familiar path into the grove. Every sound was sharper in the night, the crunch of gravel beneath his sandals, the sigh of the wind through bamboo, the distant call of an owl. Each sound rose, lingered, and fell back into the great stillness of the world. When he reached the old cedar, he paused. Its roots glistened faintly with dew, its great trunk gleaming pale in the moonlight. He bowed deeply, then sat upon the moss at its base. Above him, the sky was open through the branches. The moon hung perfectly still, as if suspended on an invisible thread. The stars beyond it were few but bright, scattered like small offerings across the dark. Wren closed his eyes. He let the night enter him, the cool air, the silver light, the distant murmur of the river. Each breath drew the world a little closer. He began to feel the rhythm of the forest again. It was not something he heard, but something he sensed, the slow pulse that moved through earth and air and living things alike. The wind brushed against his cheek, light as a feather. A leaf drifted down, landing silently upon his shoulder. He opened his eyes, and the moonlight filled them. The grove shimmered. The leaves, the stones, the very air seemed to glow from within, as if the moon's light was not shining upon the world, but through it. He thought of how his teacher once described enlightenment not as a flash of brilliance, but as the soft realization that nothing is separate. The moon, the forest, his own breath, all were simply reflections of the same quiet source. Ren smiled faintly. He watched his breath mist in the cool air, rising and fading into nothing. It reminded him of the incense smoke that curled upward in the temple hall, beautiful because it disappeared. A sound broke the silence, then a flutter of wings. He looked up. The sparrow was there, perched upon one of the low branches of the cedar, feathers silvered by the moonlight. Its eyes glimmered like small drops of light. It chirped once softly, but the sound seemed to carry far beyond the trees. Ren whispered, "You found me again." The bird tilted its head, as if answering. Then it hopped closer along the branch until it was directly above him. For a moment, the world stilled completely. The wind stopped. The insects paused. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Only the moon remained bright and full, shining upon them both. The sparrow spread its wings and lifted into the air. It circled above him once, twice, then flew through the shaft of moonlight that streamed between the trees. Its small body gleamed like silver, a fragment of the moon itself set free to wander. Ren watched it until it vanished into the deep blue of the sky. When it was gone, he lowered his gaze to the ground. But the air still trembled faintly with its presence, like a note that had yet to fade. He whispered a prayer, not to the bird, but to everything. May all beings be at peace. May all hearts rest gently beneath the moon. His voice blended with the night breeze, becoming part of it. Somewhere far away, the temple bell rang once, a low, distant tone that rolled through the forest like thunder softened into silk. Ren remained seated long after the sound faded. His body was still, but his thoughts had dissolved completely. He no longer felt the boundary between himself and the world. The moss beneath him, the cedar's roots, the cold air, the stars above, all of it seemed to breathe together. The moon climbed higher, spilling its light across his face. He closed his eyes once more, and the darkness behind his eyelids glowed with pale silver. In that glow, he saw not visions, but feelings, a sense of endlessness, a warmth without source, a peace without beginning or end. Time slowed to a single breath. He did not know how long he sat there, minutes or hours, but when he opened his eyes again, the moon had crossed to the western sky. The grove was quiet, wrapped in a deeper stillness, as if the world itself were asleep. Ren rose slowly. His limbs felt light, almost weightless. He placed a hand upon the cedar's trunk. It was cool and steady, the pulse of the earth still moving within it. "Thank you," he whispered again. A soft breeze answered, lifting a few strands of his hair. It carried with it the faintest scent of blossoms, though no flowers bloomed this season. Ren smiled. He turned toward the path leading back to the temple. As he walked, his steps made no sound. The forest seemed to part for him, each tree bowing slightly as he passed. When he reached the edge of the courtyard, he looked back once more. The grove shimmered under the moonlight, every branch and stone bathed in silver peace. And though he could no longer see the sparrow, he could feel its presence, still a quiet heartbeat somewhere in the night, reminding him that nothing, not even silence, is ever truly alone. Chapter 5: The Whisper of Dawn. The first breath of dawn came softly. It was not seen, but felt, a tender stirring in the air, a quiet loosening of the night's deep silence. Ren still sat beneath the old cedar. His body had grown still as stone, his mind like a calm lake untouched by wind. When he opened his eyes, the world was bathed in the faintest blue. The moon had lowered toward the western ridge, its reflection trembling in the dew that glistened on every leaf. The forest was silent, yet full, as if all things were listening for the same hidden note. Ren breathed in, and the air was cool, damp, alive. It carried with it the scent of moss and river water, and something faintly sweet, the promise of morning blossoms yet to open. The sound of the stream reached him again, steady and constant, like a teacher who never tires of repeating the same gentle lesson. Ren rose slowly, his knees stiff from sitting so long. He pressed his palms together before the cedar and bowed once, deeply. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was soft, almost part of the wind. The forest seemed to bow back, its leaves shimmering with the last light of the fading moon. He began walking toward the temple path. The earth beneath his feet was cold, the moss still heavy with dew. Each step left no mark, only the quiet sound of cloth brushing against grass. As he walked, the sky began to change. The deep blue at the horizon softened to gray, then to a pale, translucent gold. The first bird sang, a single note, fragile and pure, rising like incense through the cool air. Wren stopped. The sound touched him deeply. It was both new and ancient, as though it had been echoing since the beginning of time. Then, another bird answered. And another. Soon, the grove was filled with the gentle murmur of waking life. The crickets faded. The wind stirred the branches. And through it all came the light slowly, quietly, the first fingers of sunlight slipping between the trees. Wren turned to watch as the dawn revealed the forest anew. The moss glowed with soft green fire. Drops of dew shone like tiny jewels upon the bamboo leaves. And from far off, the temple bell rang, its tone deep and resonant, carrying through the mist like a call to the heart. Wren closed his eyes and listened. Each sound layered over the other: the birds, the bell, the stream, his breath, until they became one continuous song. The sparrow's whisper from the night before echoed faintly in his mind. He could almost see it again, a small shape against the moon, a living thread connecting heaven and earth. And in that thought, something within him shifted. It was not joy nor sadness, but something quieter, a gentle understanding that all moments, like the flight of the sparrow, begin and end within the same endless sky. He smiled. When he reached the temple gate, the world had turned golden. The rooftops gleamed with light, the stones along the path sparkled with dew. He slid open the wooden door and stepped inside. The interior was dim, yet warm. A small candle still flickered from the night before, its flame now pale in the growing daylight. Wren knelt before the altar. The statue of the Buddha was serene, its face illuminated by the soft glow of morning. He placed his hands together, bowed deeply, and whispered the morning chant. As the sun rises, so does the heart. As the light returns, so does compassion. May this day be a gentle one. When he finished, he remained there, eyes closed, listening to the sound of the temple waking. Somewhere, a wooden door slid open. Footsteps moved softly across the tatami. A kettle began to sing over a low flame. The scent of tea drifted through the air, earthy, clean, filled with warmth. Wren rose, walked to the veranda, and sat facing the garden. Mist hung low among the stones and moss. Sunlight pierced it in fine threads, turning each droplet of moisture into gold. A sparrow landed on the railing beside him. It was small, bright-eyed, its feathers damp from the morning dew. Wren smiled and nodded to it. The sparrow tilted its head, as if greeting an old friend. They sat together in silence, watching as the first true rays of sunlight broke through the bamboo and touched the temple roof. The day had begun, yet it felt as though the peace of the night still lingered, woven gently into the air. Ren took a slow breath. The tea kettle whistled softly behind him. The sparrow fluttered its wings, then flew into the light. He whispered after it, "Go gently, little one." The bird disappeared into the sky, but its song lingered, a thread of sound, woven through the new day. And for a moment, everything, the forest, the temple, the rising sun, breathed as one. Chapter 6: The Garden of Still Water. The morning unfolded slowly, each moment like the petal of a lotus opening to the sun. Ren sat upon the veranda, a cup of tea warming his hands. The scent of roasted leaves drifted upward, mingling with the cool scent of the moss garden below. Before him lay the temple's heart, a pond so still that it seemed to hold the sky within it. Bamboo leaves trembled in the light breeze, their reflections quivering gently upon the water's surface. A single koi moved beneath the mirror of the pond. Its slow, deliberate motion sent faint ripples outward, disturbing the perfect reflection, yet even that disturbance was beautiful, like the breath of the earth itself. Ren watched the ripples fade, the image of the sky settling once more into stillness. He thought of how fleeting each moment was, how even the smallest motion was a reminder that life never truly stops. He sipped his tea, its warmth spreading through his body like sunlight through water. From somewhere behind the temple walls, a wooden clapper struck twice the sound, deep and hollow, calling the monks to the first labor of the day. Ren set his cup down and rose. The garden path curved around the pond, lined with smooth stones and patches of soft green moss. He walked slowly, his sandals brushing lightly against the ground. The air was full of sound, but none of it loud. The hum of bees, the flutter of sparrows in the eaves, the distant trickle of a stream feeding the pond. Each sound blended into the other, forming a quiet symphony that needed no conductor. He knelt beside the water, his reflection joining the clouds upon its surface. For a long moment, he simply gazed, not searching, not thinking, only being. Then he noticed something small. A fallen maple leaf drifted upon the pond. Its color was a deep red, its shape perfect, a delicate boat upon the vast, silent water. The leaf floated slowly toward the center, spinning just slightly as it went. Ren watched it with quiet fascination. Even stillness, he thought, contains its own kind of motion. He reached into the sleeve of his robe and took out a small wooden bead. It was one of the prayer beads Shay had carried since his first day at the temple. He held it above the water, feeling its smooth, warm surface in his palm. Then, with a small movement, he dropped it into the pond. The bead sank slowly, sending out a single ripple that touched the leaf, the koi, the edge of the pond, and finally, returned to stillness again. Ren smiled faintly. He whispered a line from the sutra. All that moves returns to rest. All that rests moves again. He rose and continued along the path. At the far end of the garden, a stone basin stood beneath a small bamboo spout. The water dropped from it one clear drop at a time, each falling note echoing in the quiet. Ren crouched and dipped his hands into the basin. The water was cold and pure. He brought it to his face, feeling the freshness of the mountain spring. He looked up at the sky. The morning clouds had parted, and sunlight poured down through the trees. It touched the pond, the garden stones, and his own still form, binding all things in a single, living moment. He thought of the sparrow again. Somewhere beyond the temple walls, it must have been flying through the sunlight now, its small wings stirring the air that once filled the grove. Ren closed his eyes. He could almost hear it, not as a sound, but as a presence, as though the air itself remembered its song. He took another deep breath, and for a moment, it was as if the entire world inhaled with him. Then came the exhale, a sigh of wind through bamboo, the ripple of the pond, the sound of life continuing. He smiled again, his heart as calm and wide as the still water before him. Later that morning, as the sun climbed higher, Ren joined the other monks in their daily chores. They swept the courtyard, tended to the vegetable garden, and carried water from the well. No one spoke much, but their silence was not emptiness, it was full of purpose, like a quiet river that always flows, even when unseen. When the chores were done, Ren returned to the garden. The water still mirrored the sky, but now the wind had picked up, and the reflections danced with light. He sat again on the veranda, folding his hands in his lap. A butterfly drifted by, its wings catching the sunlight. It hovered above the pond for a moment, then vanished into the forest beyond. Ren's eyes followed its path, and in that motion, he saw another truth, that even the most fleeting thing could carry eternity within it. He whispered to the wind, "May the still water remember every ripple." The breeze answered, and for a brief moment, he could have sworn the pond itself shimmered in response. Chapter 7: The Pilgrim's Visit. By the time the sun had crossed the sky and begun its slow descent toward the mountains, the air around the temple had turned warm and golden. The shadows of the pines stretched long across the moss. The sound of cicadas was softer now, fading into a rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of the heart. Wren had spent the afternoon sweeping fallen leaves from the courtyard. He moved slowly, deliberately, each motion an act of quiet attention. When he finished, he leaned the broom against the wall and stood for a moment in the gentle sunlight. He could hear the faint murmur of the stream beyond the garden wall, and, from somewhere distant, the low ring of a bell. Then came another sound, the soft crunch of footsteps upon gravel. Wren turned. A traveler was approaching the gate. The man was dressed in simple robes, dusted with the pale color of long roads. A woven hat shaded his face, and over his shoulder hung a small pack and a string of prayer beads. Wren bowed as the man reached the gate. "Welcome, traveler," he said softly. "Please, rest here a while." The pilgrim removed his hat, revealing a face lined not by age, but by the sun and wind of many journeys. He smiled. "Thank you, young monk. I have walked since dawn, and your temple appeared like an island of calm upon the mountain." Wren gestured toward the veranda. "Please, come. We have tea." They sat together in the shade, the sound of cicadas and the faint whisper of bamboo surrounding them like music. Wren poured tea into 2 small cups. The steam rose slowly, carrying with it the fragrance of roasted leaves. The pilgrim lifted his cup, holding it in both hands before taking a sip. He sighed softly. "This tea, it tastes of stillness." Wren smiled. "That is the water from the mountain stream. It flows slowly, and gathers the patience of stones along its way." The pilgrim chuckled. "You speak as though even water were a teacher." Wren looked at the surface of his tea. "Is it not?" he said. For a while, they sat in silence. The pilgrim watched the garden, where a dragonfly hovered above the pond, its wings catching the sunlight like fragments of glass. After a time, he spoke again. "I have walked through many temples," he said, "but here, the air feels different, as if the forest itself were breathing with the monks." Wren nodded. "The forest and the temple share one body. When the wind moves, the bells ring. When the rain falls, the stones listen. We simply dwell within their rhythm." The pilgrim's gaze softened. He turned his cup in his hands, as though feeling the warmth more than the taste. "Tell me, young monk," he said, "do you not grow lonely, living so far from the noise of the world?" Wren considered the question. He looked beyond the veranda, where the bamboo swayed gently in the wind. Their leaves moved together, yet each followed its own unseen path. "Loneliness is a word for separation," he said at last. "But when all things move with the same breath, how can anything be apart?" The pilgrim smiled, the lines of his face deepening. You speak like one who has already found the path. Ren shook his head slightly. I only walk it. The breeze passed between them, stirring the edge of the pilgrim's robe and setting the tea's surface trembling. They both watched the ripples settle again, each lost in the quiet dance of reflection and stillness. After a while, the pilgrim set down his empty cup. He reached into his pack and withdrew a small, folded cloth. When he opened it, a smooth stone rested inside pale gray, marked by a faint white spiral. I found this beside the sea, he said. It has traveled with me for many miles. Would you keep it here, by your pond? Let it rest at last. Ren accepted the stone with both hands. Thank you. It will remember the waves in its silence. He rose and walked to the edge of the pond. There, beneath the reflection of clouds, he placed the stone among the others that lined the water's edge. When he returned, the pilgrim was watching the scene with calm eyes. The sea and the mountain meet in your garden now, the man said. Perhaps that is as it should be. Ren bowed. All things meet, given enough time. They shared another silence. The shadows lengthened, and the cicadas grew quiet as the first evening breeze swept through the temple grounds. The pilgrim stood. It is time I continue down the mountain before night falls, he said. Ren walked with him to the gate. At the threshold, the pilgrim bowed deeply. Thank you for the tea and the peace. Ren returned the bow. Thank you for the stone and your journey. The pilgrim smiled, then turned and began walking down the path. The sound of his footsteps faded, blending with the murmur of the stream and the sighing of the wind. Ren remained at the gate until the figure disappeared among the trees. Then he turned back toward the courtyard. The last light of day touched the pond, and in its reflection, he thought he could see the spiral of the pilgrim's stone, softly glowing beneath the water as if it remembered the ocean's rhythm, and now dreamed of waves in the heart of the mountain. Chapter 8 The Dream Beneath the Cedar. That night, the moon rose once more round and luminous, sailing through a sky brushed with faint clouds. The temple slept. The lamps had been extinguished, the corridors silent except for the creak of old wood cooling in the night air. Ren sat for a time in meditation, his breath slow and even, until the weight of the day began to draw him gently toward sleep. He lay upon his simple mat, listening to the soft hum of the forest beyond the walls, the wind sighing through the cedars, the faint rustle of bamboo, the murmur of unseen creatures moving through leaves. The sounds blended into one vast, gentle heartbeat. And as his eyes closed, the border between waking and dreaming began to dissolve. He was walking through the grove again. The moonlight was brighter here, almost liquid, pouring across the moss in silvery streams. The great cedar stood before him, its bark glimmering like stone polished by centuries of wind and prayer. The air shimmered faintly around it, as though the tree itself breathed light. Wren felt no surprise. It was as if he had been expected. He approached and bowed deeply. When he lifted his head, he noticed that the ground around the cedar glowed. Faintly, not from any lantern or fire, but from countless specks of light drifting upward like dust in a sunbeam. They rose slowly, gathering in the air until they formed a faint, human shape, neither man nor woman, young nor old. It was the presence he had felt before, the voice without words, the one he sometimes sensed during his deepest meditations. Wren knelt. "Who are you?" he whispered. The figure did not speak. But within the silence, something answered him, not in sound, but in meaning. "I am the breath that moves through stillness." The words echoed inside him like ripples on a pond. Wren bowed his head again. "Have you always been here?" The light shimmered, and the sense of an answer came. "Always. When you breathe, I am there. When you listen, I am what you hear." Wren's eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He realized that this presence was not apart from him, it was the awareness that connected all things. The sparrow's song, the river's murmur, the silence of the moon all spoke with the same unseen tongue. He raised his gaze. The figure now stood beside the cedar, its form almost merging with the tree's luminous bark. Then, from one of the branches above, a faint flutter of wings broke the stillness. The sparrow appeared, its feathers glowing faintly with moonlight. It perched upon the figure's shoulder, as if greeting an old friend. Wren felt his heart swell with quiet joy. He whispered, "So the sparrow is your messenger?" Again, there was no spoken reply, only the soft shimmer of light, and within it, the quiet understanding. The sparrow carries what cannot be spoken. The bird turned its head toward Wren, its eyes gleaming with infinite calm. Then it leapt into the air, its wings scattering droplets of moonlight that fell like rain. Each drop that touched the ground became a sound, the ringing of a distant bell, the rustle of wind through leaves, the pulse of his own heartbeat. Wren realized then that he was hearing everything at once, the entire world, woven into one single, endless note. He closed his eyes, and within that note, he felt the presence speak again. "You are not separate from the forest, nor from the bird, nor from the moon. You are the silence between them." The words were not commands, but a remembering, something he had always known but had forgotten to hear. When he opened his eyes again, the grove was brighter still. The moon hung just above the cedar, casting a path of silver light toward him. The figure of light began to dissolve, its particles scattering like mist upon the wind. The sparrow circled once above the tree, then vanished into the sky. Wren stood alone beneath the cedar. But the air was alive, filled with the pulse of every living thing. He whispered, "Thank you for showing me." No answer came, yet the silence itself seemed to smile. When Wren awoke, the first light of dawn was just beginning to touch the edges of the shoji screens. For a moment, he remained still, unsure whether he was still dreaming. The scent of cedar and dew lingered in the air. Outside, a single bird, perhaps the same sparrow, sang a short, clear note. Wren sat up slowly. He placed his hands together and bowed toward the morning light. His heart was calm. Not full, not empty, just quiet. He felt the breath move through him, the same breath he had heard in the dream. The world inhaled and exhaled with him. And somewhere beyond the waking mind, he heard again the whisper from the night. "You are the silence between them." He smiled. The day had not yet begun, but already it felt whole. Chapter 9: The Way of Returning Light. The morning came softly, not as a sudden brightness, but as a slow unfurling of light across the hills. Mist drifted through the forest like breath from the sleeping earth. The moss shone with dew, each droplet reflecting a miniature sun. Wren stepped outside, his bare feet meeting the cool wood of the veranda. He paused, breathing in the scent of pine and wet soil. The world was utterly still, as if the dream from the night before had not ended, but merely changed its shape. He walked toward the garden, where the pond reflected the pale sky. The stone left by the pilgrim now rested half submerged, its spiral faintly visible beneath the surface. Wren crouched beside it. The water rippled gently, and for an instant, the spiral seemed to move as though turning with the breath of the wind. He whispered, "The sea remembers, even here." A sparrow landed on the cedar branch above him, its feathers still ruffled from the cool dawn. It chirped once soft, almost like a sigh. Wren looked up and smiled. "Good morning, little teacher." The bird tilted its head, then hopped along the branch, its small claws scratching the bark in a rhythm that felt almost like laughter. Inside the temple, Wren prepared the morning tea. The ritual was the same as always: boiling the water, measuring the leaves, pouring the clear liquid into a waiting pot. But everything felt new. The rising steam looked like mist over the mountains. The sound of the kettle was like distant rain. Even the small act of lifting the cup seemed to hold infinite grace. He remembered the voice from his dream: "You are the silence between them." And as he drank, he felt that silence flow through him, not emptiness, but the space that allows all things to exist. After tea, he stepped into the courtyard again. The monks from neighboring temples would sometimes pass this way, but today, he was alone. The solitude was not loneliness. It belonged. He took up his broom and began to sweep the fallen leaves. Each movement of the broom made a soft sound, shish, shish, shish. The same rhythm as the forest wind, the same cadence as his breath. He swept not to clear the path, but to move in harmony with it. As he worked, a single leaf drifted down before him. He caught it in his hand, its surface golden and fragile, veins branching like rivers on a map. He studied it for a long moment. Then he placed it upon the stone by the pond, watching as the morning light touched it. In that moment, he understood there was no difference between the falling leaf and the rising sun. Both were part of the same endless returning. The hours passed unnoticed. By midday, the temple was alive with sound: the rustle of bamboo, the hum of insects, the faint chime of a bell carried from a far-off shrine. Ren sat in meditation again beneath the cedar. He did not seek vision or insight. He simply sat, and in sitting, he felt the pulse of the mountain flow through him. Each breath was a wave. Each heartbeat, a bell. Each silence, a prayer. He realized then that the dream had never truly ended. The voice without words was still speaking, not through visions, but through the smallest things: the sound of the sparrow, the shimmer of water, the space between one heartbeat and the next. He bowed deeply to the earth. As the sun began to lower again, casting long golden lines through the trees, Ren walked to the gate where he had met the pilgrim. The path stretched out before him, curving into the forest, its stones warm beneath the fading light. He did not feel the urge to follow it. Nor did he wish to remain still. Both movement and rest were now the same. Each step, each breath, each moment of stillness, all part of the same returning flow. He stood there, watching the forest breathe. The wind stirred the cedars, and from somewhere high above, a sparrow sang one final note before dusk. It was neither loud nor soft, neither near nor far. It simply was. And Ren, listening, felt his heart become perfectly still. The world breathed in. The world breathed out. And between those two breaths, he heard it again, the whisper that had followed him through dream and waking alike. All things return to light. Ren bowed once more, his forehead nearly touching the earth. When he rose, the forest was glowing with the pale gold of sunset, and the temple behind him shimmered like something half-remembered from a dream. He turned and walked back toward it, each step light, unhurried, as though he were walking not through space, but through peace itself. The sparrow's song faded with the wind. The evening bells began to ring, and in their echo, the day folded gently into night. Final chapter: the moon over the silent grove. Night came gently, as though the world itself were exhaling. The forest settled into stillness, the air filled with the faint hum of crickets and the sigh of the wind brushing through bamboo leaves. The moon rose a pale, perfect circle climbing above the cedar trees. Its light poured over the temple roofs, over the pond, over the stones worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps. Wren sat beneath the great cedar, his robe gathered around him like a shadow. He had finished his evening prayers, yet his hands remained joined, not in effort, but in rest. The air around him was cool and alive. A faint mist drifted low over the moss, and the scent of the forest deepened with the coming night. He looked up. The moon hung motionless among the drifting clouds. It seemed so near that he could almost hear it breathe. A memory stirred within him, the voice from his dream, the whisper that had followed him through waking and sleep alike. "You are the silence between them." He breathed in slowly. The forest breathed with him. Each sound, the rustle of leaves, the ripple of water, the chirp of a single sparrow in the dark, merged into one quiet pulse. It was not a song. It was not even silence. It was the space where both became one. Wren smiled faintly. He had once believed that enlightenment was something distant, a light to be reached, a truth to be understood. But now he saw that it had always been here, woven into the simple act of listening, of breathing, of being. The moonlight spilled across the ground, touching the pond until it shone like glass. Wren watched as a single leaf drifted down from the cedar, spinning slowly as it fell. It landed upon the water, sending a ring of ripples outward, circles expanding into circles, until they vanished into stillness again. In that fading motion, he saw the whole of his life, each act, each breath, rising and returning, never lost, never apart. He whispered, "Everything returns." The wind answered with a gentle sigh, and the branches above him swayed. A shadow passed across the moon. For a heartbeat, the world dimmed, and then the light returned, brighter, clearer, as though the night itself had been reborn. The sparrow appeared once more, its feathers glowing faintly in the moonlight. It alighted upon the cedar branch above Wren's head, its tiny claws scratching the bark in a rhythm older than memory. Wren looked up and bowed. "Thank you," he murmured, "for your song and your silence." The sparrow tilted its head, then fluttered its wings once, sending a small shower of silver dust, moonlight caught in motion. Then, as softly as it had come, it vanished into the dark. Wren closed his eyes. The sound of its wings lingered in the air, then faded into the pulse of his own breath. He remained there long after the sparrow was gone. The night deepened. The stars appeared, one by one, like small lamps being lit across the sky. He could feel the earth's slow turning beneath him, a motion too vast for sight, yet gentle enough to cradle his heart. The moon hung above the grove, watching in silence. Its light fell over Wren's still form, over the cedar, over the temple roof beyond. No word was spoken, and none were needed. The forest breathed. The pond shimmered. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, Wren's breath blended with the night. He was no longer the watcher, nor the one being watched. He was the space in which moon and shadow met. Hours later, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The moon began to fade, its light folding gently into the growing blue. The sparrow sang again, a single note, clear as morning water. The sound drifted through the forest, carried by the wind, and reached the temple bells. They answered softly, their tones rippling through the air like circles upon water. And for anyone passing through the grove at that hour, it might have seemed as though the forest itself were breathing not in words, but in stillness. The monk beneath the cedar did not move. He did not need to. The silence had already spoken. The moon had already blessed the earth. And in the heart of that stillness, the world turned once more toward light. Epilogue: the whisper beyond the light. At the edge of dawn, the forest breathed. Mist drifted between the cedar trunks, and the first sunlight touched the tips of the leaves like fingers brushing the surface of water. The temple was silent. Only the faint ring of a distant bell and the soft rustle of wings disturbed the still air. A sparrow flew low across the garden, its small shadow gliding over the pond where the spiral stones slept beneath the water. Ripples spread outward, circles within circles, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to wake again. Far above, the last pale thread of moonlight lingered against the brightening sky. It did not vanish, it merely changed its shape, folding into the warmth of morning. The same light that once watched over the forest now shone upon the rooftops, upon the mountains, upon the world below. And somewhere within that radiance, the whisper remained soft as breath, endless as silence. There is no end, only the quiet turning of light. The sparrow alighted upon the cedar once more. It shook its feathers, as if greeting the day. Below, the pond reflected both the sky and the earth, two mirrors meeting without a seam. The forest moved in rhythm with the wind. The moss glowed faintly. The temple bell rang once, its tone spreading like ripples of gold. For a moment, time held its breath. Then the sound faded, not disappearing, but blending with everything else. Beyond the temple, the path wound down the mountain, through bamboo and stone and sunlight. Somewhere far away, a traveler might have looked up and seen a small bird crossing the morning sky, its wings flashing silver for just an instant before melting into brightness. And if that traveler paused to listen, they might have heard it. A faint whisper, woven into the wind, gentle and eternal. All things return. All things rest. All things shine again. The world turned quietly on its axis. The grove breathed. The light deepened. And in that endless, unbroken peace, the story itself fell silent, not finished, but complete. Lantern glow among the autumn leaves. Prologue, the first light of dusk. The mountains around Kyoto were wrapped in a quiet blush of evening. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of burning cedar and fallen leaves. Somewhere far below, the city lights began to shimmer, but up here, among the winding paths and rustling pines, the world was already drifting toward stillness. At the edge of this silence stood Seigan Temple, a place so old that even the stones along the path seemed to breathe memory. The last of the daylight clung to the moss-covered steps, and a single lantern had just been lit beside the main gate. The flame trembled gently, its glow reflecting in the small pools of water collected in the stone basins. It was an ordinary light, nothing more than oil and wick, and yet, in that moment, it seemed to hold the warmth of 1,000 evenings. Inside the temple, Aren, the young monk, was finishing his chores for the day. He moved quietly through the wooden corridors, his robes whispering against the floor. Each step was deliberate, each breath calm. The abbot had once told him, "Peace is not found in silence alone, but in the way you walk through it." And so, Aren tried to walk as the lantern burned steady, unhurried, bright enough to see, but never blazing. He slid open the paper screen and stepped out onto the veranda. The mountains stretched endlessly before him, their peaks wrapped in mist that glowed faintly in the dying light. Below the veranda, a maple tree stood in full autumn color. Its leaves shimmered red and gold, each one catching the last glimmer of the sun. Aren watched as one leaf loosened its grip and began to fall. It spun slowly, gracefully, until it came to rest upon the still surface of the pond below. The ripples spread outward, small, delicate, fading into stillness again. Aren smiled faintly. Such was the way of things, he thought. The fall, the ripple, the quiet after. Every motion carries its own kind of peace. As twilight deepened, the first sound of a bell rose from within the temple, low, gentle, resonant. It rolled through the air like a wave, filling the valley with its soft vibration. The lantern by the gate flickered once, then steadied, its flame swaying as if listening. Uren bowed toward the sound, then whispered, "Another day has ended." The words were not of sadness, but of gratitude. Above him, the first stars began to appear between drifting clouds. Their faint light mingled with the lantern's glow, as if heaven and earth were bowing to each other. And in that tender hour between day and night, the temple seemed to breathe a slow, contented sigh that carried with it the promise of quiet dreams. Chapter 1: The Sound of Falling Leaves. Morning came softly to the mountains. The first light of dawn touched the ridge above the temple, and the mist that had gathered in the night began to lift, unfolding like silk drawn slowly from a chest. From somewhere deep in the forest, a deer called once, its voice fading into the distance. Then, silence again, a silence not of emptiness, but of fullness, as though the entire world were holding its breath. Uren rose before the bell, as he always did. He lit a small lamp in his room and bowed once before it, his shadow folding across the wooden floor like water. The lamp's glow brushed the edges of his calligraphy scrolls, each bearing a verse of the Heart Sutra written in his careful hand. Outside, the faintest light of dawn painted the sky in tones of ash and rose. He washed his face with cold water drawn from the mountain stream. The chill made him shiver, but it also cleared his mind. He smiled quietly. The abbot often said, "Cold water awakens not just the skin, but the spirit." The bell rang. Once, twice, its tone lingering in the thin mountain air. Uren took his broom and stepped into the courtyard. The ground was scattered with fallen maple leaves, each one a small flame against the gray stone. He began to sweep, slowly, evenly, the bristles whispering in rhythm with his breath. Sweeping was a form of meditation. To clear the ground was to clear the heart. Each stroke of the broom became a kind of prayer, each sound a reminder of impermanence. As he worked, the wind stirred through the trees above. Leaves let go one by one, turning in the air like tiny lanterns before settling on the path. He did not hurry to sweep them away. He watched them fall, feeling a quiet companionship in their gentle descent. The forest smelled of damp earth and smoke. Somewhere nearby, another monk was lighting incense for the morning ceremony. The faint trail of fragrance curled through the air, meeting the cool scent of autumn. When the bell sounded again, Uren laid the broom aside and bowed toward the main hall. The temple doors had been opened, and golden light now spilled across the tatami mats within. He stepped inside. The abbot, old and serene, was already seated before the altar. Without words, Oren joined him, kneeling, hands folded, eyes lowered. The two of them began to chant. Their voices were soft, rising and falling with the rhythm of breathing, echoing faintly through the wooden beams. Outside, the world continued to move, the rustle of bamboo, the murmur of wind, the faint splash of a carp in the pond. Inside, there was only voice and light, and the slow passing of time that felt like the movement of clouds. When the chanting ended, the abbot turned to Oren and smiled. "You sweep well," he said softly. Oren bowed. "The leaves are endless," he replied. The abbot chuckled. "So are our thoughts." They shared a moment of quiet laughter, the kind that vanished as gently as it came, leaving only warmth behind. After the ceremony, Oren went to the back garden. The sunlight had grown brighter now, pouring through the crimson canopy overhead. He sat beneath the old maple tree, where he often took tea when his chores were done. The kettle beside him began to hum softly as the water warmed. He poured it over the leaves, watching the steam rise like morning mist. The first sip was simple, earthy, real. He closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere, a single leaf fell. It brushed against another, then another, a quiet cascade of sound, delicate as the whisper of silk. And in that moment, Oren felt completely still. Not because the world had stopped, but because he was part of its gentle motion, as natural and fleeting as a leaf drifting toward the earth. Chapter 2: Tea beneath the maple tree. The sun had risen high enough to soften the chill of the mountain. By late morning, a gentle warmth filled the temple grounds, and the air shimmered faintly with golden light filtering through the maple leaves. Oren carried a small tray from the kitchen, a simple tea set of dark clay, a pot of hot water, and a folded cloth that smelled faintly of cedar smoke. He walked carefully down the moss-covered steps, his sandals making almost no sound. At the foot of the steps stood the great maple, its branches spreading wide over the garden pond. The leaves glowed like living embers, each one a note in the quiet song of autumn. Oren placed the tray on a low wooden table and sat on a cushion woven from reed grass. For a moment, he did nothing. He simply breathed. The air was still, and in that stillness, the smallest sounds became vivid: the hum of a bee somewhere in the azaleas, the far-off murmur of water flowing through the irrigation channels, the sigh of a breeze passing through the paper chimes hung by the veranda. He began to prepare the tea. The motions were deliberate, not hurried, each one as familiar as the beat of his own heart. Pour, swirl, lift, breathe. The steam rose in gentle coils, catching the sunlight in translucent ribbons. Oren watched it drift upward, as if carrying his thoughts into the air, where they dissolved like mist. When he poured the first cup, the scent of roasted leaves and faint sweetness filled the air. He raised it slowly to his lips. The warmth spread through his hands, then to his chest, and finally to his breath. It was as if the mountain itself had poured its calm into him. As he drank, a small bird landed upon the edge of the stone basin nearby. It dipped its beak into the water, sending a ripple that caught the reflection of the maple above. For a moment, the world seemed to fold upon itself, sky, leaf, and water becoming one. Oren smiled softly. He remembered something the abbot once said: "When you drink tea, do not only taste it. Listen to its silence." He closed his eyes again and listened. The silence was not empty. It was filled with motion, the unseen shifting of wind, the quiet pulse of life that threaded through the forest. When he opened his eyes, he noticed a shadow moving near the temple gate. An old villager was approaching, a woman bent slightly with age, carrying a small basket of persimmons. "Good morning, Oren-san," she said, her voice soft but clear. He bowed deeply. "Good morning, Oba-san. Have you come from the village?" She nodded. "The frost has not come yet. The fruit is sweet this year." She held out the basket. Oren accepted it with both hands, bowing again. "Please, have some tea," he said. The woman smiled. "Ah, how kind. The same spot as always?" He gestured to the cushion beside him. Together they sat beneath the maple tree, the wind stirring the leaves into a soft rain of color around them. The woman spoke of the village, the harvest nearly finished, the children preparing lanterns for the autumn festival. Her words drifted slowly, carried by the rhythm of her breath and the rustle of the trees. Oren listened, occasionally nodding, refilling her cup. He liked the way her stories wove themselves into the sounds of the garden, becoming part of the day's quiet music. When she finished, there was a pause. The woman gazed at the pond and said softly, "When I was young, I came here with my father. He said the maple leaves look like fire, but they do not burn. I think he meant something about peace." Oren smiled. Perhaps he was right. They burn without consuming. Like light, or kindness. The woman's eyes softened. "Yes," she said, "like kindness." They sat together for a while longer, watching the leaves drift down upon the water's surface. The reflection of the red canopy swayed gently, as if the pond itself were breathing. When the woman finally rose to leave, Oren walked her to the gate. She bowed and said, "The world feels lighter here, somehow." Oren returned the bow. "Perhaps the mountain holds what we let go." She smiled at that, and with a final nod, disappeared down the stone path that wound toward the village. Oren stood watching her until she was gone. Then he looked up at the maple once more. A single leaf loosened and drifted into his open palm. He turned it over slowly. The veins glowed gold in the light, fragile, fleeting, yet perfectly whole. He placed it upon the water's surface. It floated there, carried by the faintest ripple, moving toward the reflection of the sky. The tea had cooled. The shadows lengthened. And once again, the world grew quiet enough to hear the sound, the endless, gentle rhythm of falling leaves. Chapter 3: The Lantern by the Gate. Evening came quietly, as it always did in the mountains. The air cooled, carrying with it the faint perfume of pine and distant smoke. The sky had begun to fade from gold to indigo, and the outlines of the temple roofs softened their eaves, holding the last traces of light like a memory unwilling to leave. Oren knelt by the stone lantern near the temple gate. In his hand, he held a small box of matches and a wick soaked lightly in oil. He moved with care, as though his gestures might startle the approaching dusk. The flame caught. A small, trembling light bloomed within the lantern's chamber, casting a warm glow upon his face. The stone around it seemed to breathe again, its carvings flickering with quiet life. One by one, he lit the other lanterns along the path, each flame a small promise against the coming night. When he finished, he stood back and watched them, their lights swaying softly in the mountain wind. They reminded him of the villagers' lantern festival, held every autumn at the foot of the valley. Children would carry paper lanterns painted with red leaves, their laughter mingling with the river's murmur. From the temple gate, the lights looked like stars scattered upon the earth. Oren smiled faintly at the memory, then turned his gaze upward. The first star appeared just above the ridge, a pale silver point that shimmered through the deepening sky. It seemed to answer the lanterns below, as if heaven and earth were trading small, gentle greetings. He began to walk the path slowly, his sandals brushing against the fallen leaves. Each step released a soft rustle, like the whisper of time itself. He stopped beside the pond. Its surface reflected the sky's deepening hues, blue giving way to violet, violet to night. The maple leaves upon the water drifted lazily, their crimson now dark as wine. He crouched, dipping his fingers into the cool water. A ripple spread outward, catching the reflection of the lantern above. For a moment, the world seemed to fold into stillness, the flame, the leaf, the sky, each reflecting the other, each holding the same quiet heart. Behind him, the abbot's voice rose softly. "Uren," he said, "you light them well." Uren turned and bowed. "Thank you, Master." The air was still enough tonight. The old monk approached, his hands folded within his sleeves. He stood beside Uren, gazing at the glowing line of lanterns. "Do you know," he said after a pause, "why we light these each evening?" Uren shook his head. "To guide those who pass?" The abbot smiled. "Yes, and no. We light them not only for those who walk this path, but also for the part of ourselves that still wanders in the dark." Uren listened, the meaning unfolding gently like the sound of rain. The abbot continued, "When you light a lantern, Uren, you remind the night that it is not empty. You remind yourself that warmth is always waiting to return." The younger monk bowed deeply. "I will remember, Master." The abbot nodded, his eyes reflecting the faint light. Then, with a slow sigh, he said, "The older I grow, the more I see that light is never something we make. It is something that chooses to appear in stillness, in patience, in kindness." The words settled in the air like dust illuminated by the lantern's glow. They stood together for a long while, neither speaking, listening instead to the chorus of nightfall, the rustle of bamboo, the cry of a night bird in the forest, the distant echo of the river below. When the abbot finally turned to go, he said quietly, "Stay here a little longer. Let the night speak to you." Uren bowed again. "Yes, Master." He remained where he was, watching the lights flicker in their stone housings. The wind had changed direction now, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and earth. He drew his robe a little closer around his shoulders. The air touched his skin like a whisper, cool, but not cold. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, the flickering glow of the lanterns still danced. He could hear the faint sound of leaves drifting down, and beneath it all, the quiet hum of the mountain itself, steady, alive, infinite. When he opened his eyes again, the stars had multiplied, each one burning with the same gentle persistence as the lanterns below. The world, it seemed, was full of lights. Some small, some distant, but all of them breathing in unison. And in that thought, Uren felt no separation between himself and the night, only a soft, unbroken peace. He whispered to the lantern nearest him, as though to an old friend, "May your flame rest easy, until the dawn returns." The lantern flickered once, as if answering. Uren smiled. He sat there beside it until the moon rose, silver and serene, casting its pale blessing over the temple, the maple grove, and the quiet monk who kept watch through the gentle dark. Chapter 4 The River's Whisper. The night had grown deep and silver. The moon rose high above the mountain ridge, its light pouring softly over the trees, spilling like water down the temple's stone steps. The air was cool and clear, so still that even the faintest sound seemed to shimmer. A cricket's cry, the rustle of bamboo, and, far below, the murmuring voice of the river. Uren wrapped his robe a little tighter around himself and stepped beyond the temple gate. The path curved downward through the forest, lit here and there by the dim lanterns he had lit earlier that evening. Their glow was warm against the silver light of the moon, like tiny hearts still awake in the night. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and earth. The wind whispered through the cedars, carrying with it a quiet rhythm, a rhythm that seemed to call him downward, toward the sound of flowing water. He followed the path in silence. Each footstep crunched gently over fallen leaves. Each breath rose and fell in harmony with the night around him. When he reached the river bank, the moonlight lay across the surface like silk. The water moved slowly, its ripples catching the light in shifting patterns, silver, then shadow, then silver again. Uren knelt on the smooth stones, listening. The river's voice was constant but never loud. It spoke in tones that seemed older than words, the language of time itself. A whisper, a sigh, a soft laughter of water against stone. He closed his eyes and let the sound fill him. He could feel the pulse of the current, steady and eternal, a living thread connecting mountain to sea. He thought of the leaves falling earlier that day, how each had found its way to the earth, how some, carried by the wind, would one day drift into this same stream and continue their journey beyond his knowing. Everything flows, the abbot had once said. And in that flow, everything finds its rest. Uren smiled faintly. He picked up a small leaf from the stones beside him, crimson, delicate, its edges curling slightly. He placed it upon the water's surface. It drifted slowly, turning once, then floated onward, carried by the gentle current into the dark. He watched until it disappeared. The moonlight touched the surface again, and for a moment, he thought he saw a reflection move within. It not his own, but something softer, like the faint outline of another time. A memory surfaced, his first year at the temple, when he was younger, unsure, struggling to quiet his restless thoughts. That night, too, the abbot had brought him here. They had sat by the same river, listening to the same whisper of water. "You must not silence your thoughts," the abbot had said. "Let them flow as the river does." Do not damn them, and do not chase them. Simply let them pass. At the time, Eren had not understood. He had wanted clarity, discipline, control. But now, years later, he felt the truth of those words in the sound around him. The river did not hurry, nor did it resist. It simply moved. He let his thoughts drift to the faces of villagers, the glow of lanterns, the falling leaves, the abbot's smile. They all passed through his mind like ripples, each leaving behind a faint light, then fading into calm. The moon rose higher, casting its reflection directly onto the water before him. It shimmered like a living flame, a lantern lit by the sky itself. Eren whispered, as though to the river, as though to the night. Carry my heart where it belongs to stillness. The wind answered with a sigh, and the river replied with a low, gentle murmur. The two sounds mingled until they were one, as inseparable as breath and silence. He remained there for a long time, until the cold began to seep into his hands. Then he rose slowly, bowed toward the river, and turned back toward the temple. As he walked, he noticed that the lanterns along the path had grown dim. Their flames were smaller now, but not yet gone. They flickered softly in the night breeze, each one echoing the river's glow. When he reached the temple gate again, he looked back once. From there, he could see the faint shimmer of the water below, a silver ribbon winding through the darkness. He thought of the leaf he had placed upon it, floating somewhere beyond his sight. Perhaps it would reach the village, perhaps it would join the sea. He smiled to himself. The destination did not matter. The journey itself was enough. He blew gently upon the nearest lantern. Its flame wavered, then steadied a small, quiet heartbeat in the endless night. Eren bowed once more to the darkness and whispered, "Good night, river." The water's reply was soft, like a lullaby. And as he returned to his room, that sound lingered in his mind, a steady, soothing murmur that followed him all the way into dreams. Chapter 5: The Visitor in the Mist. The morning came quietly, veiled in white. When Eren slid open the shoji screen, the world outside was soft and colorless, as though the mountains themselves had exhaled a long, gentle breath of mist. The trees were only shadows, ghostly outlines against the pale sky. Even the temple's bell, when it rang, sounded distant, muted by the heavy air. He stood on the veranda for a moment, hands folded within his sleeves. Drops of water clung to the edges of the roof, falling now and then with a slow rhythm. Plip, plip, plip. The scent of wet earth and cedar filled his lungs. It was neither cold nor warm, a perfect stillness, like the moment before waking from a long dream. He decided to walk the garden path. The moss was damp beneath his sandals, and each step made a faint sound, barely heard beyond the whisper of fog. At the pond's edge, the world seemed to vanish entirely. The surface was smooth, mirroring only the white sky above. Even his reflection was gone. For a brief instant, he felt as though he too might dissolve into mist, become part of this endless calm. Then, through the fog, a shadow moved. A faint shape, human, but wavering, as if drawn in smoke. Uren stopped. The figure came closer, slowly, until the outline grew clear enough to see an elderly man, wearing a travel cloak, a small wooden staff in his hand. The man bowed deeply. "Good morning, young monk," he said, his voice low and kind. Uren returned the bow. "Good morning, traveler. You must have come far. The path is steep." The old man smiled, and in the mist, that smile seemed carved from light. "I have walked many paths," he said, "but this one led me here." He looked around, as if admiring the barely visible garden. Then his gaze settled on the pond. Even without reflection, he said softly, "Water remembers the sky." Uren tilted his head, unsure of his meaning, but somehow the words felt true. He gestured toward the veranda. "Would you like some tea to warm yourself, sir?" The man nodded. "If it would not trouble you." They walked together to the veranda. Uren poured tea from the kettle that had been warming since dawn. The steam rose between them, twisting and fading into the mist beyond the eaves. The traveler sipped slowly. "Ah," he said, "this tea tastes like autumn itself, a little bitter, but gentle at the end." Uren smiled. "It is made from the leaves grown near the river below." The old man nodded. He sat quietly for a while, eyes half closed, as though listening to something far away. At last, he spoke again. "Tell me, young monk, what do you seek here?" Uren hesitated. The question was simple, but it seemed to echo through him. Finally, he said, "I wish to understand peace." The old man's eyes softened. "And have you found it?" Uren lowered his gaze. "Sometimes I think so. Then, like mist, it slips away again." The man smiled faintly. "That is its nature. Peace does not stay where it is sought. It follows those who forget to chase it." Uren looked up. "Then how does one live with such a thing?" The man turned toward the garden. "By becoming mist yourself. By holding nothing tightly, yet touching everything gently." The words settled into the air like falling leaves. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint dripping of water from the eaves filled the silence. Then the old man rose. "I must go," he said. "The fog will lift soon." Uren stood as well. "May I ask your name, traveler?" The man smiled again, that same light-carved smile. "My name is not important. Names belong to the ground, but I belong to the air." He bowed once more, and before Ren could reply, the mist thickened around him. When it cleared, the man was gone. Ren stood alone on the veranda, the tea still warm in his hand. He looked toward the pond. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a reflection there, not his own, but the faint shimmer of a lantern's flame. Then it vanished. The bell rang in the distance, its sound rolling gently through the fog. Ren closed his eyes and bowed toward it. When he opened them again, the mist had begun to lift. The first rays of sunlight broke through, touching the tops of the trees. The world returned slowly, as though waking from sleep. Ren whispered, to no one and to everything, "May all who wander find their rest." And with that prayer, the last of the mist rose into the sky, light meeting light, peace meeting peace. Chapter 6: The Festival of Light. The air that evening was cool and gentle, carrying the faint scent of smoke and river water. Beyond the temple walls, down in the valley, the village was preparing for the lantern festival, a celebration that marked the turning of the season, and the quiet farewell to autumn. Ren had gone down only once before, years ago, when he was still new to the temple. He remembered the soft glow of hundreds of lanterns, each one floating down the river like a small star set free. This year, the abbot had asked him to attend again. "Go, Ren," he had said, his voice calm but kind. "See how the people honor light. There is wisdom even in their joy." So, as twilight fell, Ren wrapped himself in a simple brown cloak and began the descent along the forest path. Lanterns hung from the trees on either side, their paper shells trembling in the breeze, their light moving like living breath. The path wound through bamboo and pine until it opened into the valley below. There, the village lay spread like a scattering of lanterns, itself warm, golden, alive. Children ran past, laughing, their voices ringing like wind chimes. Old women arranged offerings of rice and persimmons near the shrine. Men carried baskets of candles to the river bank, their faces glowing softly in the firelight. Ren paused at the edge of it all, taking in the scene. He had lived so long among trees and silence that this small hum of human life felt almost like music. A young girl noticed him standing there. Her hands were folded around a small lantern, its paper painted with crimson maple leaves. "Are you from the mountain temple?" she asked, her voice curious yet polite. Ren nodded. "Yes. I came to watch the festival." The girl smiled shyly. "Would you help me light this?" My candle went out. Uren took the lantern gently. He shielded it from the wind with his sleeve and lit the wick from a nearby flame. The lantern bloomed softly to life, its light golden and warm. The girl bowed. "Thank you, Monk San." "You're welcome," he said, smiling. "Take care that the wind doesn't steal your light again." She giggled and ran off toward the river, her lantern swaying like a small sun in her hands. Uren followed slowly, watching as the villagers gathered at the water's edge. One by one, they released their lanterns, setting them upon the surface of the river. Each light began to drift downstream, joining others until the dark water became a flowing ribbon of gold. The sound of flutes rose from the far bank, a slow, lilting melody that seemed to dance with the current. Drums followed softly, their rhythm like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Uren stood beside an old man who was kneeling near the shore, his lantern cradled carefully in both hands. "For my wife," the man murmured. "She passed last winter. But the light it still finds her, I think." Uren bowed his head. "Yes," he said softly. "Light always finds its way home." The old man smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the river's glow. He released his lantern. It floated for a moment, then joined the others, drifting toward the horizon. Uren watched them all, hundreds of small lights, each carrying a memory, each carrying a prayer. He thought of the river by the temple, how he had once placed a leaf upon it and whispered to the night. Now, here before him, was that same motion, the same quiet surrender, but this time shared by many hearts. A young monk from the village approached him, bowing respectfully. "Would you like to release one too, brother?" Uren hesitated. He had not prepared a lantern. But the monk offered him a spare plain white, with no markings. Uren took it and knelt by the water. For a moment, he did nothing, only watched the flame flicker inside the paper shell. Then he whispered, not a prayer exactly, but something like gratitude. "For all who walk between silence and sound, between shadow and light, may their hearts find rest." He set the lantern upon the river. It rocked gently, then began to move with the others, its flame steady and calm. A child's laughter echoed nearby, and somewhere, bells began to ring. The flutes played on, their melody winding upward toward the stars. Uren stood watching until the last of the lanterns became small points of gold in the distance, then vanished altogether. When the music faded, the villagers began to return to their homes. Uren lingered a while longer by the river bank. The air was cool now, and the night full of quiet voices, the rustle of reeds, the faint trickle of water, the sigh of lantern smoke. He looked up. The moon had risen round, bright, tender. Its reflection shimmered on the water like another lantern, larger than all the rest. He bowed deeply to it, and in that bow, he felt as though he were bowing to every light, the ones in the river, the ones in the sky, and the one within his own chest. As he turned to climb back toward the temple, a thought came to him, gentle, wordless, like the touch of the wind through bamboo. Even a single light, when shared, becomes an ocean of stars. And so, with the glow of the lanterns still in his heart, Ren walked into the quiet mountain night, the sound of the river following softly behind him, like the echo of a prayer returning home. Chapter 7 The Silent Bell. The mountain was still asleep when Ren awoke. Outside, the darkness was neither night nor morning, a breath caught between two worlds. He sat up slowly, the soft rustle of his robes the only sound in the quiet room. From somewhere deep within the temple, a faint draught stirred, carrying with it the scent of pine and fading incense. The memory of the lanterns lingered in him, their glow, their motion, their gentle surrender to the current. Even now, when he closed his eyes, he could see them drifting down the dark river, becoming smaller and smaller, until they were stars. He rose, lit a single candle, and began his morning ritual. Each gesture, folding the blanket, washing his face, arranging his cushion, was deliberate, unhurried, like the movement of a leaf in still water. When the candle burned low, he took his broom and stepped outside. The courtyard was quiet, the sky just beginning to pale in the east. Mist clung to the ground like a thin veil. Beyond the temple walls, the forest waited in silence. He began to sweep, slowly, as he always did. But this morning, something felt different. The sound of the broom against stone was softer, almost distant, as though it were coming from another world. And then he realized no birds were singing. No wind through the trees. Even the river below had grown silent. It was as if the world had paused, just for a moment, to listen. He stopped sweeping and looked toward the bell tower. There, the great bronze bell hung suspended in the early light, its surface touched by dew, its mouth open to the sky. It had not yet been rung that morning. Still, he thought he could hear it, not the sound itself, but the space where the sound would be. That silence, it filled the air like music too deep for the ear. He walked slowly toward the tower. Each step felt lighter, as if the ground itself were fading beneath him. When he reached the bell, he bowed deeply. The rope hung motionless, its fibers darkened with years of touch. Ren placed his hand upon it, but did not pull. He simply stood there, feeling the quiet weight of the moment. He remembered something the abbot had once said: "When you hear the bell, do not listen for the sound. Listen for the silence that follows. That is where the true teaching lives." He let his hand fall away and closed his eyes. The air grew stiller. The mist thickened. The world around him softened until it was only breath and light. And in that perfect stillness, he heard it. Not a ringing, but an echo inside the heart. A vibration that seemed to move through everything, through stone, through tree, through air, through the quiet chamber of his own being. It was as if the mountain itself had spoken, without words, without sound. He breathed in deeply. The silence was not empty. It was full of memory, of life, of everything that had ever been. The abbot's laughter, the child's lantern, the river's whisper, the mist and its visitor, the leaf that had fallen and floated away. All of it was here, woven into that soundless moment. And in that stillness, Oren understood not with thought, but with the simple clarity of being. The bell does not need to ring. It has already rung, from the beginning. He opened his eyes. The first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, turning the mist to gold. Birdsong returned, faint and pure. The river began to murmur again. Somewhere in the distance, a deer called once, its voice low and kind. The world was waking. Oren bowed deeply before the silent bell. Then he smiled, not because he had found an answer, but because he no longer needed one. He turned back toward the temple. The air was cool on his skin. The leaves beneath his feet glowed with morning dew. As he reached the veranda, he heard the abbot's soft voice calling from within. "Oren," he said, "you are awake early." Oren bowed. "Yes, Master. I was listening." The abbot smiled. "To the bell?" "To everything," Oren replied. The abbot chuckled. "Then it seems the mountain has taught you well." They stood together, watching as sunlight spread across the valley, touching the roofs of the village below, turning each lingering wisp of mist into light. The abbot spoke again, his words almost a whisper. "Sound fades, light fades, even life fades. But peace only changes form." Oren nodded. The wind stirred the trees. Somewhere, a single leaf let go of its branch, drifting gently toward the earth. He watched it fall, and in its quiet descent, he heard once more the echo of that silent bell, not as a sound, but as a presence. A reminder that nothing was ever truly lost, only transformed. He folded his hands, breathed in the morning air, and whispered one final prayer. May all things return to the silence from which they came. And with that, the temple bell, though untouched, seemed to ring. not in the air, but in the heart of the mountain, and in the quiet heart of the monk who listened. Epilogue: The breath of the mountain. Days later, when the last leaves had fallen, the temple stood wrapped once more in stillness. The river flowed, the mist drifted, and the bell remained silent, but its echo lived on in every corner of the mountain. Uren now rose each morning with the dawn, his heart steady and light. Sometimes he would sweep the courtyard, sometimes he would walk by the river. But always, he would pause to listen to the wind, to the water, to the faint hum of the world awakening. And each time, within that vast, gentle silence, he would hear it again, the bell that never rang, the sound that never ended. A sound that was not a sound, but peace itself.